Okay, dear colleagues, let us start our next session. And what I found out after looking on the program just a few days before we start off our event, but we are somehow missing with Skолтех. And the Skолтех, one of the innovative university in our country, and it was kind of not very kind to them, because even Konstantin, he is not directly now affiliated with the Skолтех. And very fortunately, our colleagues, Olga, brought our attention to a very nice example for our meeting, to the newly established laboratory led by foreign scientists exactly in the Skолтех. And considering that many people in this audience are working with the plants and with the plants genomic, we found a kind of perfect match. So it's my great pleasure to introduce next speaker, Dr. Loran Gentbittel, and I hope he will introduce the new initiative about implementing agri-genomics and biotech to contribute to the elevation of Russian agro-industry to the global level.
Thank you, Oleg. Thank you, colleagues. Thank you for inviting us more or less at the last minute. It's a real pleasure to deliver. So, Konstantin this morning was speaking about Monty Python, so I would like also start like Monty Python, and now for something completely different, if you remember that sketch. Just a couple of words about me. There is nothing very interesting about it. Just to show you that. I'm sorry, it does not work. Okay. I started in a private biotech company. It was in the 90s, you know, like in that time of real prehistoric times, where we were using RFLPs to make genetic maps and detect tutors. And we were at that time already developing marker-assisted selection in sunflower. And then I joined the academia for several reasons. Not because the salary was greater, but for other reasons. And what is interesting with this academia is to see the commitment from our students here in that higher school of agronomy. And for getting the diploma, our students need 12 weeks in a row abroad. And when we say abroad, it means it's preferably outside the EU, 12 weeks in a row. And then for the last year, they need to have 6 months of industrial immersion. And industrial immersion is not in a lab, it's in a company. It can be in a lab, in a company, but it is not within academia. And last point, they need to have a kind of level in English and B2 with a score of 600. So I would like to just rapidly give you an overview of the EU and Russian Federation market in agriculture. It's interesting because we start with that. At Skолтех, we are developing demand-driven research mainly, and we need to fit the needs of the industry. Then I will describe the industrial landscape and some words about genomics. Okay, so agriculture is really a significant source of revenue. If you see the value added, I mean, it's not only the turnover, but the value added of agriculture in Europe, it's something like 16,000 billion rubles. So it starts to make something interesting, and among this output, approximately 50% of the output is due to crops, and 40% of this output is due to breeding, selling animals for food, of course. And if you look in the list of the main countries, top 4, it's France, Italy, Spain, and Germany. So most of the science and the production in agro-research is done in France, Italy, Spain, and Germany. So for Russia, there are some encouraging picture because there are already some opportunities. First of all, Russia is doing a little bit more than 3% of its GDP thanks to agriculture compared to Canada or European Union, that is only 1.5%. And you can see that a share of ×7 improvement is possible if you compare the extra EU exports for 180 billion euros compared to the 20 billion euros of Russia at the same time. So it shows that there is really a huge opportunity that can be done. And it should not be missed because there is no reason to miss that opportunity. But this opportunity is not only due to the fact that Russia has a lot of land. In fact, it is not really true. It's kind of tail. If you look really the numbers, the amount of arable land or available land in Russia compared to the EU is less than 20% more. So Russia will not outperform just by sowing more lands. It's not the solution. So there is a need to improve the techniques, to improve the industry, and this improvement is really interesting. Yet, if we look really the data, Russia is still a net importer of agricultural products. On this graph, you have in red export, in blue import, EU, and then Brazil, France, Italy, Spain, and Russian Federation. And you can see that Russian Federation is exporting less than France, Italy, Spain, and even, unfortunately, it is still a net importer of agricultural product. This is not, I would say, an obvious situation because Russia has a lot of opportunities. Just to look a little bit more into the detail for the case of animal genetics that was thoroughly discussed this morning with very good speakers like Natalia and our colleagues from Austria. The more cows in the world is India. The less production of milk in the world is India. It's something that is very, very clear. In Russian Federation is in pink, and you can see the decrease of number of heads, but it is due to the collapse of USSR. So when USSR collapsed, most of the farms were liquidating the herds, but then it starts to increase again. But yet, if you look at the yield of Russia is far below the yield of other comparable European countries. This means, again, that opportunities are there to improve the process, to improve the research, and to improve the production. So I would like to go into the industrial landscape, not in Russia, but abroad, mostly in the EU and in the US. So I'm sorry, but perhaps it looks boring for scientists, but it's very important because it's a point that why we are doing science and why we get money to do it. So we are consumers, okay? We buy at retailers. These retailers buy towards food companies, traders, farmers, and here is the core of the system, what is called the input companies. The input companies are the companies that produce the semen, that produce the seeds, that produce the chemicals, that produce the fertilizers, sometimes that own the land. Okay, and these input companies are, in fact, a segment that is in Russia is driven mainly by foreign companies. In Russia, you have most of the companies have a kind of vertical integration system. You see, like they produce the flour, they produce the animals, and go to the retailer. It's typically the case for example, for Miratorg. It's kind of vertically integrated company like that. You have other companies like, for example, Auchan, that is typically an EU company. So it's a retail company only, and it buys everything to food companies or to traders and so on. In Russia, most of the companies are farmers, in fact, here, in that segment. They are producing crops, they are producing meat, they are producing milk, dairy product, but they are not at the root of the system. They are not input company, and in Russia, the only input companies that exist are companies that are doing chemicals, fertilizers, because it's a legacy of the big USSR, this big USSR industry. And there is a very strong opportunity to develop this sector in the Russian Federation. Why? Because if you are not sufficient for your seeds, if you are not sufficient for your semen, for your animals and so on, just stop the system, and then you have nothing to eat. So it's really something very important for Russia, not to be able only to produce, but to be able to be self-sufficient in seed companies and semen. Okay, what is the seed sector globally? You probably know most of these companies. What is in this yellow, I'm sorry, the pointer is not working. It's a pity. Okay, in the yellow box is what is called the seed companies. So the main companies that produce what farmers are sowing in the fields. There are different types of companies. Companies that are only doing plant breeding and variety development, like, for example, Euralis or Sakata. You have companies that are doing applied biotechnological research and that go up to the end to sell the seeds, like Villemorin, it is the head of the Limagrin, or KWS that you probably know, also in Russia. There is a very interesting segment of companies like Energene or Kgene that you perhaps also already know, that are only doing biotech. These companies take project from big agro, do the project and sell the result, but they are not producing seeds, not producing anything. And you have the big companies like Bayer, Corteva, and so on, and these companies are already doing also fundamental research. So there is a continuum from this company to produce knowledge, to develop techniques, to put IP, to develop their own varieties, and to go to sale and marketing for the farmers. If you see, if we are looking at the turnaround of these companies, you can see that, okay, it's not bad. 800 billion rubles a year for Bayer, little bit more than 600 billion rubles a year for Corteva, and so on. What is interesting to see is the biggest turnaround, the most they are upstream in this schema, meaning that they are doing more research than the others. So research is a way to make money and to secure profit. When I'm talking to students in Russia, most of them say, oh, I want to do research and I want to do in academia. But in fact, it's not the truth. In the EU, 51% of researchers are working in private companies. It's not only kind of public sector, it's mostly a private sector. Also, what is very important, very interesting, it looked like it increased by 1/3 in 10 years. So not only it's a highly developing sector, but it's a sector for private work. This should be explained to our students to show them that, oh, no, doing research is not only doing working in academia. If we compare the number of researchers in Russia to other main competitors, I would say it's not bad. It's within the range of Germany, France, Italy, Spain, and Holland. So the number of brains is not different. This is also a point to have in mind. One thing difficult to consider is the fact that return on investment in agriculture is long. It's not in 6 months, it's not in 1 year, it's not in 2 years, it's sometimes in 10 years. And also the amount of investments are sometimes huge. Bayer spent 200 billion ruble a year for agriculture. 200 billion ruble a year for a single company. Syngenta, who is now held by Chinese, consider that if the amortization of their research program for example, for chemicals is 20 years. This explains why, for example, these companies are so aggressive for protecting glyphosate, because glyphosate is more or less in the 20 years, so it's still not amortized. Okay, so they need to continue to promote it. But for seed and breeding, the amortization is between 5 to 7 years. So sometimes we are discussing with private company and that asks, okay, what can you do in 6 months? Oh, almost nothing. Just the plant can grow. That's it. So do not dream. R&D is a key feature for the seed companies. something that is very important. Agro is, for all the industrial sectors, the one that is putting the more research in action. This is a figure for Limagrin, French company. You can see that 40% of the turnover of Limagrin is invested in research. It can compare to pharma industry, on average 10%. It can be compared to automobile industry, 5%. So agro is, from all the industrial sectors, the one that is putting the more in research and development. And that's why there are so much job in the West in agro companies, because it's really demanding and it has really a future. Of course, these companies are not working for nothing. They are managing all their research program around a very famous equation that is called the Breeder's equation that was published by Lusch in 1945. It exists two different forms of this equation, but the one that is interesting is the form at the bottom, that it is that the improvement of one breed, of one variety, depends on the selection intensity, the selection accuracy, the genetic variance, and the year per cycle. And all the business for companies and all the business for public institutes should be organized around this equation. You should go fast because we will need to feed 10 billions of people in a short time. And to be able to do that, we need to optimize the Breeder's equation. So what's going on in Russia? This is not a slide from myself, it's a slide from the High School of Economics that has done a quite thorough and very precise analysis of the landscape in Russia and in particular in agro-research. And I would say that the result is not really positive. You can see that all these red crosses show problems into the value chain and problems into the organization of agro-research in Russia. It's a mix of history and a lot of different things. I'm not going to comment it because I do not have the skills to do it, but there is something that needs to be improved. Okay, so I don't want to go to speak too much about genomics because it's not really the moment, and we have already had a lot of very interesting talk about it. First of all, also when we are talking to students in Russia, agro, whoa, what doing agro? Going into the fields, into the mud, under the sun, with the rain and so on. And no, guys, this is not agro. This is, yes, probably agro of 19th century, but now it's not agro. Agro is very fun. And agro, for example, typically has genomics deeply rooted in plant breeding. You can see that genomics is in the middle of this value chain. So it means that since 25 years, when I was young and started to do that, these methods are already rooted into the science and are used by the companies to produce. So we have a chain from the germplasm, you know what is called biodiversity. Then this biodiversity is characterized on the level of the genome, but also at the level of the responses. That's what we call phenotyping. And this phenotyping can be done with a lot of very fun different methods like near-infrared fluorescence, lot of computer vision, and so on. Genomics, at the upper part, is to, of course, sequence the genome, find the markers, detect QTLs, compute breeding values of the animals or breeding values of the plants, and then go something that is more really towards, I would say, the industrial activity, that is GAB, genome-assisted breeding. So when using all the information of the genome to create new crops or to create new animals, and hybridization and line selection. Similarly, in animal genetics and animal sciences, genomics is deeply rooted into the practice. Now, just to have in mind that chicken genome was published 3 years after the human genome, okay? So you think, oh, problems with no availability of data. It's agro, it's not interesting, like cattle 2009, not already more than 10 years ago. And high-density SNP chips were already available with 750K different genetic markers already in 2010. It means that we were able at that time to score the genome of any animal with a density that is absolutely quite huge, because the genome of bovine is more or less the same as the genome, human genomes. And nowadays, for example, in the US, and we have a very excellent talks this morning about genomic selection, more than 1.2 million cows are genotype. It means that there is a database with all the genome information about these cows, and this information is used to predict the performances. What are the golden rules of genetics, in fact? So I'm speaking here about genetics, not molecular biology. The phenotype is the sum of the genetic effect, G, environmental effect, E, G by E, the fact that one genotype is good in one condition but not good in another condition, and some error, okay? So the golden rules of genetics is to manage the plasticity, phenotypic plasticity, it is the G by E term, and to manage the microevolution component, the G term, in a noisy environment, E. And you need to take into account all these components to be able to understand a trait in a cow, but to be able also to understand an expression of a trait in a human or in a mouse. And the selection approach take into account the complexity of the trait, genes, epigenetic, metabolites, complex traits, multigenes, and so on. And typically, the picture, the sketch at the below of this line is a sketch from the Energene company that they are explaining how you can do some scientifically based breeding. So, because the legend is that breeding is an art, I would partially disagree. Breeding is a science, and you have to assemble a genome, compare the genome to find the variation. It could be SNPs, it could be presence-absent variation, it could be a lot of things. You need to study the diversity of the genomes, get the genotype of interesting individuals, use these data to predict the value of these individuals. They will be diseased or not, they will have blonde hair or blue eyes, and so on. And using this prediction, you can breed, meaning I will take this cow and this bull and make some, create some adapted calf. So this morning we already talked a little bit, not a little bit, but into the details of genomic selection, so I don't want to go too much into the details. So genomic selection is totally similar in plants and animals. There are absolutely no difference, except sometimes perhaps what is called, you see, genomic selection model, that is the statistical part of the model, may be a little bit different between plants and animals, but not so much. And what is interesting to see is that it works, given the investment. This is the example of the Texel breed in UK, in Wales, to be more precise. Can you see the price that one lamb was sold? 380 million rubles. One animal, even not adult. It was just a little bit lamb. But the performances of this animal were predicted so outstanding that they know that they will sell thousands and thousands of those of semen, that the cost of this lamb is 30 million rubles. Just a little animal. So it means that this system is working, and this system is providing progress, and this system is providing, of course, profit. Just have a look about the investment and return of investments. 3 million pounds invested. Yes, of course, it's 300 million rubles. Wow, so much money. Yes, but look at the return of investment. 2.4, more or less 148. Not a bad bet, I would say, even for a government. You invest 200 million rubles, you will get 1.8 billion rubles in return. So genomic selection in animals works very well. In plants, it works very well also. I would say nowadays that 80% of corn varieties in the West, 80% of wheat varieties and so on are selected with genomic selection. This is an example that we also were involved. It is also a point to discuss how you should collaborate. Of course, we need to collaborate, and a lot of our previous speakers explained how it is great. Really, it is great. So it is a project for resequencing whole genome of a little bit more than 3,000 chickpeas. So chickpea is a legume. It's not very popular in Russia, but it's very popular in, you can see, in that part of Asia and sub-Saharan Africa. And to do that project, I think we are 57 scientists and 30 different institutions. Because to do so much work like that, you need to have a network, and the more brains, the better you are efficient. One very interesting point about this project is that the CISA genome is not so big, 700 megabases. But what makes a CISA is only 26,000 genes, and what makes CISA different between them is 3 gigabases. It means that it's a well-known thing that when you are doing comparison of genomes and comparing pan-genomes and dispensable genomes, the more you add accessions, the more you are reducing the core genome. And in fact, in that kind of species, the core genome is very small, and most of the variation is due to dispensable genomes that is not only repeated sequences, but also genes, orthologs, paralogs, and so on. So we were all able to use that data set to predict the performances of some varieties, and we were using kind of prediction machines that we published 2 years ago. What is very interesting is that, okay, it's agronomic traits. It's probably less fun for you than other disease in humans, but you know you need to eat every day, and every day you are concerned with day to flowering and day to maturity and pot per plants. What is interesting with this kind of model is that we are able to predict the performances for some traits, in the range of more than 80%. So we know that the methods that are developed based on the genomic information and taking into account G by E interactions are very efficient and are totally able to predict, like for example for plot yield, we are about prediction about 90% of the plot yield. So it means that now we have very good tools using this genomic information and using adapted, suitable statistical method to be able to do that. So far so good. What about Russia? One of the main problems of Russia is the following. This is an absolutely outstanding paper that was published last year about analysis of 400 varieties of wheat. 400 varieties of wheat coming from 71 countries. And if you look into the details, there are 2 Russian varieties, and these 2 Russian varieties were not obtained via Russian institutions. And it is not the only one paper. And as working in Russia, because now I'm working in Russia since 18 months, I see really a major risk for the Russian Federation is to be left by the wayside of the global progress because of a lot of things, including regulations on genetic material. Because Russia has strong difficulties to exchange genetic material, and Russia has strong difficulties sometimes to participate to global projects. I don't know why, because I'm a foreigner, so I'm not used to understand that point of scientific culture, but this is something that we have to keep in mind. And I would say that there is a possible need to update current Russian regulations on exchanges of genetic material, or clearly Russia will be simply left by the wayside. Because not being part of this kind of paper, it's really a pity. It's not worse for Russia, because Russia is a big producer of wheat, as a matter of fact. So at Skoltech, we are developing a lot of skills of genome-assisted breeding. Of course, genomic, phenotyping, genome-assisted breeding, and we are developing in collaboration with companies what is called the pre-breeding part here, novel lines, and the creation of genetic resources. So, just a few slides about genome-editing organism. Okay, we can discuss hours about genome-editing organism, but one question is important: who is developing genome-editing organisms, and for what purpose? And just have a look at the global literature and about market-oriented genome editing. I'm not speaking about, okay, I will turn this flower from blue to red or something like that, just market-oriented genome edited. Okay, China, USA, and then the other one. This is a very severe picture, and for Russia, this cannot be also a way for the future. Rice, 81 varieties are developed. Tomato, 26 varieties. Maize, 25 varieties. And what is absolutely interesting with genome-edited organism, at least in plants, is the fact that you can see the blue, orange, and green parts of these pie charts. These are traits that are related to the quality, or that are related to the agronomic value, or for stress tolerance. So it is totally different from the previous picture with GMOs that were done by big companies to be able to not only sell the GMOs, but also all the technological package that goes where. So with plants, genome edition is able to produce things that are interesting for the consumers. Very nice example of what is called a de novo domestication. So starting from a wild tomato, something that I don't know if you have ever seen a wild tomato, but it has berries like that, and sometimes green, absolutely bitter, totally unable you cannot eat them. But by using genome edition, this group was able to produce something like was considered as a domesticated tomato, but the techniques that was used was not so easy, because I remember they needed to edit 12 genes at the same time. And this was a question with our colleague from Austria about genome edition in animals. Is it possible? I would say yes, but. Because in animals, it's exactly the same situation in plants. Yes, but. For one gene, it's okay. For several genes, it would be very difficult. And okay, so just look at what is already done. Genome-edited animals, yes, and there is a problem. From publication to market release, because currently there is no market release. 2015, already, genome edition of myostatin, like, you know, the genome-edited animal is at the right. You can see the big butt, because it produces a lot of meat, but still, no market. And it is only one gene. But if you need to edit 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 genes at the same time, it will start to be tricky, because you need to have to check for off-target, you need to have to check for epistasis, you have no need to check for a lot of things. So these methods, for now, need to be evaluated. I would not say prohibited, absolutely not, but really evaluated. Other problem is, okay, how to disseminate genome-edited alleles into the production herd. You probably do not, perhaps you know that, but how genetic improvement in animals is done. Improvement in animal genetic is done in a very small number of animals that is called the nucleus. And then, using successive crosses, the genetic gain in the nucleus is disseminated to the production herd. But this genetic gain is disseminated in 5, 6, 7 years. It is called the genetic lag. So it's exactly the same question for genome edited, because we will edit 1 co, 2 co, 10 co, okay. But then you have to disseminate this mutation in, for example, Miratorg has 200,000 animals. how to go from 10 cows to 200,000. It will take a lot of time unless we invent new methods to do it. And it is not so obvious. Okay, so the Center for Agro-Technologies at Skолтех is in fact something like, was more or less a comment of the president. Agriculture is something that is very important for Russia. As I explained, you can see at the right, the share in red of import of seeds for some key crops for Russia, like for example 98% of sugar beet seeds are imported. 99% of potato seeds are imported. So this is really a matter. But this cannot be done like that. And we need to look what is done in the West, in the EU, what can be done also in the US. The situation is slightly different. And what is very important, so there were some discussions this morning on how to get into the companies and how to interest the companies and get some insight. The first point here is market demand. If you are not doing something that is for the market, it is useless. You are spending your time, spending your money. Okay, you will do perhaps one or two good publications, and that's it. It has no future. So you need to go to understand the market demand. And this market demand should travel through a number of intermediate organizations. It's not only the consumers, but it is also associations of producers, association of consumers, regulatory states, regulatory members, and so on. And then you have a flow of knowledge between research and education and business. And this is this flow of knowledge that is very important. And in fact, the state only has to provide some infrastructure and framework conditions, but not really to interfere within the market demand and within the objective. So our center at Skолтех is to lead the elevation of Russian agriculture, so it is our kind of, wow, looks great. In fact, it is interesting because agro-industry is multifaceted. Agro-industry asks several questions. It requires a lot of expertise, and we are using a lot of data. So we need to include into this Center for Agro-Technologies groups and scientists that are working in different areas, and these areas are fertilizing each other to answer the demand. In particular, genome editing, quantitative genetics, digital agriculture, and agro-industry. Typically, the flow of work is the one: white species, core collections, germplasm, lot of sequence, lot of SNPs, lot of databasing, then big data analysis. But this big data analysis not only deal with genotypes. You need also environment, you need phenotypes, you need a lot of things. And to do that, you need methods. Obviously, you need bioinformatics, but you need biostats, Bayesians, machine learning, neural network. And at the end, you are going to predict the breeding values or to discover the causal loci. So what we are doing here at Skолтех is to federate, to create something with three main thrusts. One is digitalization and envirotyping. It is a group that are characterizing climate, soil, everything, maps, and so on. Animal sciences and plant sciences. And of course, there are huge overlaps between these different thrust. That means that peoples will work together. We are also developing several educational initiatives towards executive of agrobusiness. We have an agro MBA with RANEX, and we are also developing teaching, training and retraining initiative towards scientists in private companies, but also public institutions, and we already had 70 scientists into. So I don't know if you know Skолтех. This is Skолтех today. We are working with business integration. This is our customers, not all of them, but some of them, and including private companies, but you can see also some republics like Tatarstan. We have key equipment, not only sequencing, but also in greenhouses, phytotrons, and also spectroscopy, spectrometry, because it's needed to characterize the plants and to characterize the animals, access to genetic collections, facilities, and by 2025, I aim to create a staff of around 55 to 60% with 12 to 15 faculties and a group of researchers. We have a network of collaborations, of course, that comes from our previous experience from myself and Professor Ben in the US, in most of Europe, but also some BRICS countries, Shanghai, ICRISAT in India, and University of Western Cape in South Africa. And, okay, there is really an exciting future for this kind of methods, because you can do molecular biology, you can do bioinformatics, you can do computer vision. You can have fun in all the different fields you are interested in, because you can characterize the lands, you can characterize the traits, you can make bioinformatics for pangenomes, you can do all the omics you need. Then you will identify genes, mining the good alleles, define candidate genes, do genome edition to validate or to modify the properties, and then go to new germplasm. And then there is a genomic selection rolling circle that takes the new genetic variants, I would say, the new genetic material, and output varieties and breeds. And of course, this makes money. And this is a system like Bayer, Corteva, and all the other ones are using, because they are mastering all the steps of this system, taking satellite images, doing genome edition, model training, and at least, of course, releasing varieties and breeds. And thank you for your attention. I hope I was not too boring.
Lorran, thank you very much. Yes, it's, I know it's a newly established center in Scottex, so it's very exciting. So do you have any comments or questions? Maybe I can start very briefly. So yes, Russia is very weak in taking part in international consortiums for genetics, but these days, you know, so a lot of money invested in gene technologies in Russia. So maybe this is a way to establish own consortium to be center of, to select kind of Russian very popular plant and grab the resources from abroad. So how do you see this? Because we don't have this either yet. So would it be kind of logical way, or just instead we lose the rules and just to try to integrate to the international parts?
Okay, so you are asking two different questions. The first is to integrate international consortium. Of course, it's mandatory, because as explained this morning and probably yesterday, the more brains, the more cultural differences, etc., it's absolutely it benefits absolutely to science. Then, what you are discussing is specialization. It's a very typical term in agro production, like some countries are specialized in some productions and are not producing other productions. This is not done for Russia. And it is unclear for me what can be the specialization, because sometimes there is like obvious, like wheat. Yes, but no, because the wheat production in Russia is half of what it can be elsewhere. So there are opportunities to work. But yes, definitely there are some thinking to do about what kind of crop, what kind of agricultural system to use, conventional, organic, mix of both, genome edited or not, and so on. So just to remind that now Europe is going to lift the ban on genome edition. So EU plus US plus China plus India. Russia will be the only country in the world, I would say, that will not authorize genome edited plants. It will be tough to resist. And yes, a lot of interesting discussions to pursue. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, okay. Yes, Helena. Would you give?
Thank you so much for your beautiful presentation. Very, very interesting and common presentation. I want to ask, what do you think about place in agricultural technology, in the development of agriculture in common, microbiota, microbiome analysis, maybe soil or rhizosphere, phyllosphere, especially for plants. What do you think about this?
This is definitely a very interesting focus, and I would say that at Skoltech we are working on biocontrol solutions using microbes to control disease or produce from microbes. So the idea, as we were just discussing, is to modify the production system, because you cannot stay with using chemicals, fertilizers, and so on, just because EU will put a tax for CO2, $60 per ton. It will be huge. So we need to remove, not to remove, but to optimize the production system. And there is definitely a lot of opportunity to do good research, in fact. It's absolutely exciting.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you very much, and let's thank our speaker again.
Thank you.
Very nice.